Welcome. Cheers. We
Good
got a
morning.
coffee this morning. This is one of those where the sun is not up, but we are. So fantastic. So we are excited, or at least we're going to pretend that we are this early in the morning, but it is fantastic. I am Kirk M. Samuels. If anyone doesn't know, I am the intimacy incubator. Part of my personal mission statement is with strength, wisdom, gentleness, and mercy. I co-create a world of intimacy and unconditional connection by teaching 1 million men how to live free from internet pornography. So part of my mission statement of co-creating a world of intimacy and unconditional connection is centering life and getting people to think and to ask questions around relationship and around the dynamics of relationship and the way things happen and the way we connect and the different parts of our relationship. And unfortunately, for a lot of people that have had issues with pornography involving in their life, a lot of people have found themselves at a place where their relationship is falling apart, and a lot of people have found themselves where their marriage is falling apart. I'm one of those. I'm a two-time offender. I like to say. So part of one of the, kind of uncommon, kind of one of the difficult parts of this conversation is to talk about, our relationships. When we formalize our relationships, whether you consider it a spiritual thing or a legal thing or what, or just a relational thing, when we formalize our relationships under the guise, under the context of marriage. And when you get to that point and when you, especially if you've been like me and you found that it didn't work out for whatever reason and it falls apart, then we have some difficult kind of things to grapple with and understand. So I have one of my great friends online here today, and she has a smoke detector that's chirping in the background.
Sorry.
So we'll hear that. But let me introduce you all to, yet again, this is not the first time. This is the second time, or her second time being on Uplift. Let me introduce you all to one of my good friends, Teresa Wilkins. How are you this morning?
Good morning. I'm doing very well. Still working on my coffee. Still waking up.
I'm pretty sure
early.
We both are. We were talking about before we started recording here how we got to have our coffee. She had to go get up and get her coffee. But yeah, we both have our coffee. We're good to go. Mine doesn't even have any cream in it today. That's what kind of a day it is. I would not mess with me here this morning because I'm coming with the straight Rwandan coffee. Anyhow, enough about me. Let's talk about you, Teresa. Where are you from? Let's remind people. Where are you from? Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Tucson, Arizona, raised in Phoenix, Arizona. Didn't move to Colorado until, wow, it's been a few years now, 1996 for law school.
Wow. Law school.
For a while.
Law school. What's up with law school? What are you doing in law school? You went to law school?
Yeah, law school, learning a few things.
Wow.
This and that.
What kind of things do you learn in law school?
All the lawyering stuff.
Wow. Are you a lawyer?
Currently practicing family and employment law.
Family and employment law.
Yeah. So family law, all the, fun divorces and child support modifications and dealing with the relationships and business entities, which I believe is the subject that we.
Wow. But so you are involved in people's lives when they're going through these kind of transitions that we're talking about.
Yes.
What a coincidence that you would be on here today. And that's exactly what I'd be talking about. That is fantastic.
I know. I'm excited about this conversation.
Fantastic. So how long have you been practicing family law?
Oh my gosh, Kirk, you're making me feel old today. I've been practicing since 1999.
Oh, that's not long at all. It's only 19 years.
Right.
That's that. But that means you've seen a lot. You've seen a lot in terms of relationships.
I have seen a lot.
In terms of what happens when people are in this place in life. So I guess the roundabout. Obviously, what I'm doing is I'm just introducing you to the audience and setting the stage for this conversation. So in the conversation, I would like to ask, or the big question I would like to get to today is centered around the whole notion of marriage itself. Now, again, I'm a two-time offender. And so I like to kind of, I take my experience, and I found that my experience somewhat can be kind of common, and at least I understand from the inside out as to what is happening or what is going on through that whole thing. And so I'm curious now, and you know, I'll admit, one day I hope to be married again and do it right this time. I'm working on that. I'm working on that as we speak. Um, but that being said, when we get into the when we get into when you walk down that aisle, proverbially speaking, metaphorically speaking, when you walk down that aisle and you walk into that relationship, what I like to think of relationship or that marriage as a relationship in terms of two people, you know, coming together and you're saying all the good stuff and you're making the agreement to live together and all those kinds of things. But then when I found my marriage falling apart, and sometimes I even call it the death of a family, when I found that falling apart and then I found myself in court and that kind of stuff, I realized, wait a minute, this kind of seems like a business. This kind of seems like a thing, not like a us. So when people get married, is it considered like a thing, like an entity?
It is a legal entity. And I don't think a lot of people think about that going into it. Going into it, they have all the warm, fuzzy feelings of a relationship. They're thinking about how much they love this person, how much they want to be a partner with this person. But when they think of partnership, they don't think of the legal part of it and the financial part of it. Maybe they have some discussions regarding finances, but when you get married, then the state essentially imposes on you some legal obligations, and those deal around your assets, your debts, maybe your need to support the other person, or how that person's legally obligated to support you and the children. There's a lot of different things I don't think people think about going into the marriage. But they all hit when you're coming out of the marriage.
Exactly. Because then I found myself, you know, we're having to have conversations about assets and debts and you know, basically almost like, you know, income, assets, liabilities, and all that kind of stuff that you would think of when it comes to business, property, and all that kind of stuff. And you know, and then on top of that, and I don't know if it is that way in every state, maybe it's just a flat out legal term, but then I realized that divorce is not even like the general, you know, legal term. When I got to the court, it was a dissolution. I mean, so it was like I'm dissolving something.
Right.
And
You have dissolution of marriage and you have a dissolution of a business in a business setting. So in some ways they are similar.
and so when or if I find myself going into that, and by the way, I actually happen to work with, or a lot of times when people come to me with this particular issue in their life in terms of struggling with pornography, a lot of times it has to do with the end of a relationship. Like normally it's a guy whose wife says, I'm done and I can't do this anymore. And so he finds himself kind of at the point of, man, you know, my life might be in this transition. And so, and I guess that's kind of the core of this conversation is what can he expect? But I just found myself all of a sudden having to look at things in a totally different way in terms of money and dollars and cost and stuff and all that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, and so in the context of it being a business or relationship, can it be both?
I think it's absolutely both. I think the differences between the business relationship and the marriage is the intimacy part. And that's something that I think you're very familiar with. You deal with that every day when you're talking to people and trying to bring intimacy back into relationships. You have the intimacy part, and that's the connection. So you have the underlying business aspect of it, the assets, the debts, the financial issues. But those are more undertones, whereas in a business setting, that's kind of the key component to a business setting. In the marriage, it's the undertones, and you have the intimacy that's really holding the marriage together, in my opinion.
Wow. So yeah, when I think of, okay, I leave out the door in the morning and I go to my work or my business, and when I think about that, as opposed to when I come in the door in the evening, and when I enter into this entity, I don't want to call it a business, but when I enter into this intimacy or into this entity, it almost seems like the difference is based on what you said, the relationship. I mean, the fact that there is that extending form of intimacy, and me being the intimacy incubator, I would like to increase that intimacy so that we don't have to find ourselves dissolving things and that sort of stuff. And so should he look at, and again, I'm framing this from a male's perspective, a guy's perspective, should he look at it in terms of mindset if he does find himself at the point of, okay, my marriage is now over and we are moving forward, and I've sent guys to you, to help look at their situation. Should he look at it like differently when he finds himself in the position of the intimacy has dissolved, such that his relationship has dissolved, now that it becomes an entity, a business kind of in a courtroom? Should he look at his situation totally different?
Well, my hope is people are going into marriages thinking about these things, discussing these things. Communication is kind of key going into a marriage. You really should know what your legal obligation and rights are going into it. But if you find yourself at a point in your marriage where things are dissolving or maybe getting rocky, you're not sure which way they're going to go, then it's always a good idea to go in, get that legal advice, find out what your rights and responsibilities are if you don't already know that, so that you can make informed decisions. It doesn't mean you're coming in to see an attorney because you absolutely want to get a divorce. But if you come in to get a consultation and you find out what your legal rights and responsibilities are, you can at least make some informed decisions going forward on how you want to proceed.
And it kind of, as you just said all that, it kind of shifts my mindset to, and again, part of this is setting the stage and open up the door for people to have conversations that could be difficult, maybe even could be uncomfortable, but do lead to intimacy. I think when we have those difficult conversations, and when we do, when you are truly intimate with someone, you're able to have conversations that are beneath the surface, and this is one of them. So could it be one of those, going into it with a level of intimacy conversations to discuss? And it's kind of a fine line, because you don't want to discuss what happens if we get divorced, but going into that relationship or going into that marriage, if you will, especially if you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, or even maybe like 30s or something, where now you kind of have things that you're bringing in, like kids, property, careers, actual businesses, and that sort of stuff. I mean, could it open the door for people to have deeper conversations, level of conversations, if they do kind of come in talking about those things legally?
I think that's a great idea. I mean, you talk about everything else. Why wouldn't you talk about finances? Why wouldn't you dive deeper into those conversations? And then there's no misunderstanding. Maybe one person's thinking A about how your financial situation is going to be, the other person's thinking B, and you're not discussing it and you're not coming together, and then the arguments are going to arise because you don't have the same perspectives, you don't have the same backgrounds. At least if you talk about them, maybe you're different, but you can come to some sort of compromise. A good example of that is, and I know people look down on prenuptial agreements because they think it creates a business relationship out of a marriage. But the truth is, you're going to have a business relationship out of the marriage anyway. The state's either going to impose those rules on you, or you and your partner are going to communicate, come up with those rules for yourselves and put them into a written document called a prenuptial agreement. So either way, you're going to have the underlying financial tones for your marriage, but you decide whether the state comes up with those or whether you come up with those yourself.
Wow. Now I'm getting a little fired up here because now I'm thinking, you know, and again, we've, you know, on these uplift calls, I've had people talk about, you know, I've had financial planners, I've had counselors, I've had just all kinds of people talk about, I've had, you know, a couple talk about, you know, sexuality, I mean, and so, I mean, the core of all of this is setting the stage to have conversations that we don't normally have. And flat out, I mean, the fact is a lot of people go through this experience. I mean, this is something that, you know, it's common in terms of, you know, in terms of divorce. Every day, you know, I did some research a little while ago, at least in the context of my book, and every day, you know, there's on average 2,400 divorces 7 days a week across America. And you know, according to those statistics, 6 out of 10 of those divorces involve people with, you know, with pornography issues in their marriage. And so we're talking about something that not only happens just in general, and that, you know, I think people always throw out the, well, 50% of divorce or marriages end in divorce and that sort of stuff. And a lot of that, even those numbers are kind of skewed because a lot of that is people, quite honestly, like me, that have repeated divorces. So, but at the same time, I mean, this is something that's happening all around us. And this is something that, you know, that it's going to happen, to your point, whether we talk about it or not, or whether we address these things or not. And so now I'm thinking, actually now I'm thinking seminar. Now I'm thinking back to that whole thing we talked about earlier. Like, man, we got to get some people in a room and have these conversations before they get married. And I think this is, you know, we gotta equip some people before they get married. So this whole notion of having these conversations, but now, in my opinion, maybe you don't want to have such a deep dive conversation when you're still in the courting phase and when you're still, you know, when you're still in the getting to know and all that kind of stuff. But maybe when you get to the point of, okay, this is, you know, we're thinking of marriage, maybe this is a conversation we need to have. What do you think?
I would agree, but I would agree that you want to start having conversations early on. Maybe in the courting phase, you have a general idea of what people think about money. People think about money very differently. They think about intimacy very differently, emotional intimacy, physical intimacy. You need to have a general idea of how your partner views these things. You don't have to dive into every single detail, but you at least want to know whether or not you're on common ground.
Wow. And again, I'll just back. We had actually talked some time ago about doing a kind of a little seminar thing for, you know, couples that are married or newly married or about to get married. And to me, these are just one of those conversations that, man, I mean, if we have these conversations ahead of time, we're better set up going in. And so it's just hitting me that, you know, that this is absolutely one of those conversations. And because I think we go in seeing relationship or seeing, marriage as just one thing when it's actually more than one thing. And I think to open up our minds and to see things in a bigger picture of, you know, almost setting up boundaries, almost setting up, I don't want to say rules, but almost setting up just kind of a playing field to operate on. I think that you know, that could go a long way for a couple.
I would agree. But you talk about having the conversations early on. They need to start early on, but they need to continue throughout the relationship or throughout the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I think communication and intimacy are the key components to any good relationship when you're talking about marriage.
Yeah. And so someone finds themselves in a courtroom, or maybe not, but find themselves in the situation where their marriage entity is being dissolved. You have things like, you know, things like child support, for example. If someone's never been through a divorce and they have no idea what that is, Is that something that a number that comes out of nowhere? Where does that child support number come
The child support number is a formula. They have different computer programs. I mean, the key components of child support calculation are the gross incomes of both parties. So incomes before any taxes are taken out. So you can't mess with the numbers if you change your deductions. So you look at gross incomes. The number of overnights that you have your children is important because there's a huge difference between, like, if the parents have a 50-50 parenting time schedule, or you have one parent that maybe only sees the kids every other weekend. That's a huge component on who's going to pay more to determine the support of your children. And then there's other smaller factors that go into it, whether you have an obligation for children from other relationships, health insurance for the children, who provides that, you get a credit for that. If there's any extraordinary medical expenses, as an example, if a child has maybe an ongoing medical issue, they need regular treatment for that, who's paying for that, who gets the credit for that, other little things, but those are the main components of what goes into a child support calculation to determine what the child support obligation is going to be.
So it's a formula. I've had conversations with people that don't get that it's a formula. They think
it's a formula.
They think that they walk into a courtroom and a judge or somebody says, "Oh, you look like you should be able to pay this much money, and so here, pay this much money," or whatever. It's just some random number. And I've tried to explain to guys that no, that's not it. You're not a victim of the courts hating you because you have to pay child support. A lot of guys get bitter that, oh, the courts are, this and that, anti-men and that kind of stuff. And first of all, I say, don't end up in court. You don't have to worry about it. But secondly, something like child support is a formula. Now, is there any other, in terms of, again, for the person that's going through that, when they get into that scenario, are there any other factors in the dissolution of that entity that could end up having them write a check to their spouse?
Well, let me take a step back. You mentioned that some men get bitter about having to write the check to the soon-to-be ex-spouse. But if they keep in mind that the money is not for the spouse, the child support amount is for the child or the children. I think that's important to note. What the purpose of the child support statute is to maintain a similar household for the children. So even after you divorce, if there's a huge disparity in income, then the children can at least try to live the same standard of living at both households. So if the person paying child support can think in terms of supporting their child and for the benefit of the child, then the check is a little bit easier to write. I'm not going to say it's always easy, but it's a little bit easier to write. The other important thing that people need to know is that when the courts look at the child support obligation, that's not something that the courts want you to negotiate. Unless there's an exceptional reason to deviate from the child support guidelines, the court's going to stick to that child support number and the statutory amount because the benefit is for the child, it's not for the spouse. So to answer your other question, the other thing people have to consider is spousal support. And so that is for the benefit of the other spouse. That's in situations where, again, there's a huge disparity in income and the spouse needs support in order to maybe that person's been a stay-at-home parent. They need support to transition back into the workforce, or they need support to go back to school so that they can earn a better living, which will benefit everybody down the road.
And so how long do they have to pay the spousal support? Hey, wait a minute. First of all, is that the same thing as alimony?
It's the same thing as alimony. It's called alimony, maintenance, spousal support. Okay. All those terms are interchangeable.
Okay, sorry. Back to the question. How long they gotta do that?
The statute also dictates how long that is. And depending on the length of the marriage, it can be anywhere from a third to a half of the marriage, the length.
So then, if there's a formula for child support and a formula for this and a stipulation for that and all that, so what are we getting together to talk about before them? What is that whole prenuptial thing involve?
Prenuptial agreement, you can, well, the other thing you do is you divide assets in a marriage and you divide financial liabilities. So when you're getting divorced, you have to take a look at, okay, what are all the marital assets? What are all the marital debts? And we're going to divide those equitably in a divorce. If you have a prenuptial agreement, what you can do is you can allocate, okay, normally in a marriage situation, all income earned by either party is going to become marital property. You can dictate in your prenuptial agreement that maybe some of that income is allocated as separate, maybe some of it is marital. In terms of assets, anything acquired during the marriage is marital property. And I'm giving you general rules here. There's always some little exceptions. I won't talk about those today. If somebody has property that they own prior to getting married, but there's an increase in value, such as maybe a home, there's an increase in value during the marriage, that can be substantial, and that's marital property. In a prenuptial agreement, you can dictate that both the separate property and any increase in value remains that person's separate property. So there's a lot of things you can do with assets and debts. You can make sure that only those debts that you're acquiring, if there's a huge disparity in how people view money, maybe one person's a spender, one person's a saver, you can dictate in your prenuptial agreement that only those debts incurred individually, those are your separate debts rather than marital debts, which is what's going to happen if you enter into a marriage without a prenuptial agreement. Mm-hmm. I think what a lot of people don't understand is if you have a marriage without a prenuptial agreement and one person is accumulating maybe thousands of dollars of credit card debt, they're buying a ton of stuff for the house, they're putting groceries on it, those credit cards aren't getting paid, then they end up in a divorce situation. One party doesn't realize, oh my gosh, we have $20,000 in credit card debt. Guess what? It's marital debt, and they're equally responsible for that debt. If you have a prenuptial agreement, you can get out of that situation. So that's what I mean in terms of the state dictating what your rights and responsibilities are going to be versus dictating those for yourself in a prenuptial agreement.
So that pre-conversation is not going to involve child support. It's not going to involve spousal support. It's going to involve things like you just said.
It can involve spousal support. There's an exception though. The court's going to, if you have a term in your prenuptial agreement that says both parties waive spousal support, great, you can enter into that agreement. However, at the time of the divorce, the court's going to look at whether or not that agreement is unconscionable. So if at the time you got married, things were pretty equal, you both waived maintenance, spousal support, then you have children, and maybe one person becomes a stay-at-home parent and you get to the time of your divorce, well, one person's making $100,000, the other person's a stay-at-home parent, they're not making anything. Is that unconscionable to waive spousal support and have absolutely no support for the person who stayed home and took care of the children?
Wow.
So they look at that. In terms of the children, you cannot put anything in a prenuptial agreement regarding parenting time, child support. Those are benefits of the children, and you cannot waive or modify those in a prenuptial agreement.
Wow. I mean, and this conversation is just so deep because then I'm thinking, I mean, there's so many nuances. I mean, what if one person is bringing in some kids and the other person is bringing in some kids and that sort of stuff. And I guess the whole core of this, and as we're going to wrap up here, I guess the core of this conversation of the topic today just brings me to the fact that You know, these are conversations that we need to have in the context of building that relationship, understanding that the relationship is bigger than you. The relationship is bigger than the individuals and bigger than the two people collectively. And so though, you know, that marriage that you're entering into may be a relationship, there are bigger things to consider. What if you considered all of those things ahead of time and were able to have some deep dive conversations before you get to that point, and then you're able to have difficult conversations? To me, are key to the measure of your intimacy in your relationship. So, you know, again, I mean, to me, that just hits home of, you know, I believe, I'm an optimist, and I believe that, you know, one day I'm going to be there. You know, me and her, the one I've been waiting for my entire life, we're going to do it. And I just want to have, I mean, I want to be able to have these deep dive conversations. And so this, to me, seems like one of those conversations that we as people, as we get into relationship, we need to consider these things and we need to talk about these things. And so to me, that's the core of all of this, just setting the stage for your relationship being bigger than you and having these kind of conversations, which opens the door to all kinds of intimacy. If you could talk about money, if you could talk about death, if you could talk about divorce, dollars, debt, and divorce, if you could talk about those three things, and a couple other ones, you have a pretty good intimate relationship. And so thank you so much. Hey, how can people get a hold of you? I mean, if they want to have these conversations, or if they want to, you know, if they want to find more, ask more questions, how can people get a hold of you?
If they have questions or they want to sit down and meet with me, they can either call me. My phone number is 303-414-4798, or they can send me an email to contact me, Wilkins, WILKINS, LLC, @comcast.net. Don't put detailed information into your email. Just let me know how I can contact you. That way we can have the conversation. I need to make sure I don't have any conflicts before we have the conversation.
Awesome. That is fantastic. I'm telling you, we gotta do the seminar thing. I mean, we gotta give people, like, just
let's plan that. That's a great idea.
We got to give people a playbook of conversations, of things they need to discuss before they get married. And, you know,
Yes.
me, you, and we got someone else that we pull it in. I mean, but man, that could be, we gotta work that one. We gotta work that one.
I would love to participate in that. That sounds great.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And just a word of encouragement out there to everyone. First of all, you know, these webinars are meant to help people. Feel free to pass these along. You know, I love having Teresa on. There's so many resources out there. I'm a resource as well. My website is kirkmsamuels.com. You know, again, reach out if you need it. But man, these are definite conversations we need to have to set us up in the future. Thank you so much, Teresa. I appreciate you tremendously. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate all the work that you do. And you are a phenomenal human being. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kirk. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.